The Department of Justice published over 3 million documents related to deceased sex offender Jeffrey Epstein at the end of January. This comes over a month past the deadline the Epstein Files Transparency Act gave the DOJ to release all of their documents related to the disgraced financier. Included in the latest batch of documents are emails that give a glimpse into Epstein's relationships with the rich and powerful, as well as materials related to the government's criminal investigations into Epstein and his associate, convicted sex offender Ghislaine Maxwell. Barry Levine, author of The Spider, Inside the Criminal Web of Jeffrey Epstein and Ghislaine Maxwell, joins Forbes True Crime to discuss what he's learned from the latest batch of documents. Hi everybody, I'm Brittany Lewis, the host of Forbes True Crime. Joining me once again is Barry Levine, who has been covering Jeffrey Epstein for years. He's also the author of The Spider, a book that investigates Epstein's criminal network. Barry, thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you as always, Brittany. Always happy to speak to you.
On Friday, the Department of Justice released over 3 million more documents related to convicted sex offender and disgraced financier Jeffrey Epstein. From everything you've been able to see so far, the thousands of documents and emails and reports and photos and videos, what are some of your takeaways?
Well, I've certainly been going through the documents as best as I can, nonstop, with a couple hours of sleep. And there's just so much material, obviously, to get to. I think that, way back when in the summer, I wrote an op-ed piece for the New York Times, raising 9 different questions of things I'd like to see in those files. And while I am finally seeing some of these things, I still have so many questions that remain, even from the material that's been released. And I'll just jump around here. For instance, I located Jeffrey Epstein's autopsy report because there's still a great many people who think that Jeffrey Epstein didn't take his life and may have been murdered behind bars. And while the autopsy report was included in full from the medical perspective of Dr. Kristen Roman from the New York Medical Examiner's Office, who conducted the autopsy, the biggest question I had has not been answered, which was there any DNA testing done on the ligature that was wrapped around his neck to determine if there were anybody else who was holding that at the time when he was hanged. And certainly DNA testing on that bed sheet that he used would help tell us if someone else was involved in his death. And as best as I can find, there hasn't been any DNA testing done on that. So that's very frustrating to hear, because I don't think without real DNA testing, we'll know if there was anyone else involved in his death. So, I came away from that kind of upset in the sense that the documents could have shown more. Now, the other big factor that I have been looking into really from the beginning of this investigation into Jeffrey Epstein, in the years even before I started my book, were the other individuals involved in the sex trafficking. And I was really hoping that these files would finally answer some of these questions. Now, for background, I just want to briefly say that Virginia Giuffre, who since took her life this past year, who was the most vocal accuser of Jeffrey Epstein and Ghislaine Maxwell, she, of course, had named several men in court depositions and court papers and interviews. Of course, most famously was Prince Andrew, who has subsequently lost his title in England in terms of being a royal there, and has really, faced unbelievable outrage across the world as to his alleged actions involving Virginia. She, of course, also named prominent billionaires who were connected to Jeffrey Epstein. She named some politicians, a governor, a senator, someone from the entertainment television industry. So we had a list of about a dozen names from Virginia. And what I really found most interesting this past summer, when we were attempting to get the files released and the survivors were holding rallies, and Representative Thomas Massey and Ro Khanna were spearheading the Transparency Act to get that passed, excuse me, is that Thomas Massey had outlined the fact that he had come across 20 names of men. And I will just quote him as saying that these were men who, according to FBI 302 witness reports, these were the 20 alleged men who took part in Epstein's sex trafficking. Now, while he didn't name them, I do believe that some of those men were on Virginia Giuffre's list. He described them as one Hollywood producer worth a few $100 million, one royal prince, which I think we can assume was Prince Andrew, one high-profile government official, one high-profile former politician, one owner of a car company in Italy, one rock star, one magician, at least 6 billionaires, including a billionaire from Canada.
All right, folks, buckle up, because what you just watched from Premium Times is another perfect example of how the Epstein story keeps getting bigger, darker, and more disturbing, while the people who are supposed to give us answers keep hiding behind redactions, delays, and excuses. I want to react to this video as a right-wing patriot who believes in law, order, transparency, and equal justice under the law, not selective justice for the powerful. Let's start with the basics. The Department of Justice just dumped over 3 million Epstein-related documents late. Mind you, and somehow we're supposed to applaud them for transparency. Sorry, not buying it. When the government misses its own legal deadlines and then releases documents that are mostly blacked out, that's not transparency. That's damage control. And Barry Levine, who's been on this case for years, basically confirms what a lot of us already suspected. Backhand index pointing right. We were teased with answers, but denied accountability. Let's talk about Epstein's death. The autopsy is there. Fine. But here's the part that should make every American furious. No DNA testing on the ligature. None. Think about that. You got the most high-profile inmate in the federal prison system. You've got cameras malfunctioning. You've got guards falling asleep. And you don't even run DNA tests on material used to kill him? That's not incompetence, that's institutional failure at best, and a cover-up at worst. As a patriot, I believe in evidence. Real evidence. And without DNA testing, the American people are being told, just trust us. No, absolutely not.
The Justice Department had verified any of these claims. The cover page included the logo of the FBI's Child Exploitation and Human Trafficking Task Force, and the presentation also listed other prominent men who witnesses say were involved in sexual activity, though not necessarily misconduct. Now, in that category, that included former President Bill Clinton and Leslie Wexner. Leslie Wexner, of course, was the CEO of the limited company. He was Jeffrey Epstein's initial main benefactor. Jeffrey Epstein had power of attorney for Leslie Wexner for many years, up until Jeffrey Epstein's arrest in Florida and the non-prosecution agreement in 2007. Leslie Wexner subsequently said that Jeffrey Epstein had stolen millions and millions of dollars from him, and of course denied any wrongdoing as part of any sex trafficking. Now that slide, there's a slide in that presentation that is in the new FBI files, and the slide is titled Prominent Names, and it briefly summarizes accusations against President Trump, Harvey Weinstein, New York financier Glenn Dubin, Prince Andrew, Jess Staley. Jess Staley was the key banker at J.P. Morgan Chase, who really was Jeffrey Epstein's point person for many years. In addition to Jess Staley, you have Leon Black, Leslie Wexner, Alan Dershowitz, the lawyer who Jeffrey Epstein used for his non-prosecution agreement, Bill Clinton, Howard Lutnick, of course, the Commerce Secretary in Trump's administration, and also names William Barr and Leon Black. Now, again, these are summary accusations against these individuals. There's no specific charges from any of these men, and the FBI, of course, has pointed out that majority of these claims are unverified and haven't been corroborated. Now, the other main piece of evidence that we found that really discusses any third parties who are involved in the sex trafficking is a very detailed 86-page prosecution memorandum. And this is, over the 86 pages, there's many pages that you can clearly read through from the beginning to end, but there's many additional pages that are heavily redacted. And at the end, there's almost a dozen pages that are fully redacted, to my frustrations in terms of really understanding what they have here. It's important to note that this memo was drawn up 4 months after Jeffrey Epstein's death in 2019. It was compiled for the U.S. Attorney Jeffrey Berman at the time to, quote, analyze the extent to which certain of Epstein's associates and employees may or may not be criminally liable for their conduct during their employment with Epstein. Now, as we know, the only individual besides Jeffrey Epstein that was charged, of course, was Ghislaine Maxwell, who was successfully prosecuted by the DOJ and now is behind bars serving 20 years for sex trafficking. A prominent name in this document is Jeffrey Epstein's longtime assistant and scheduler, Leslie Groff. Now, she's an important individual because she was one of the 4 women who was given immunity at the time of Jeffrey Epstein's 2007 non-prosecution agreement. The other 3 women, Nadia Marcinkova, Adriana Ross, and Sarah Kellen, were all schedulers. These were 4 women who worked under Ghislaine Maxwell, who scheduled the girls, scheduled the massages, and really just kind of took care of all the ordering things as mundane as ordering food being delivered to the Palm Beach house and doing all different types of tasks for Jeffrey Epstein and Ghislaine Maxwell. Now, to me, the most important elements of this memo are the men that were named that at least at this point in 2009, the DOJ was taking a serious look at. And the names in this memo are Jean-Luc Brunel, who was, of course, the French modeling agent who, as we know from my own investigation, from survivors and from police investigations, he sent, I wouldn't say dozen, I would say hundreds of girls overseas from Eastern Europe and other places to Jeffrey Epstein. He was maybe the key international facilitator of girls, underage girls, minors, who took part in the sex trafficking. And so his name as part of this absolutely makes sense. Now, he was charged separately from the Epstein case on rape charges in Paris, France, and it's believed that he took his life, similar to Jeffrey Epstein, behind bars in Paris, France. Interestingly, his death followed closely Jeffrey Epstein's death behind bars. So he, of course, is no longer with us. The other names in this document, of course, focus on Leon Black, Jess Staley, the banker, Leslie Wexner, and Harvey Weinstein. And as I say, there's no indication in the memo of the specific investigative efforts by the DOJ to corroborate witnesses or evidence. So that's kind of where the files have left us. And they've left me now with even more questions that I have. than I initially had last summer, because we've opened up a Pandora's box here, and the DOJ has teased us with information about these key individuals in Jeffrey Epstein's web, but they haven't specifically detailed the investigative efforts they made to either include these men or discount them as part of the sex trafficking. So that's kind of where we are, Brittany.
Now, let's get into the part the media dances around. Barry Levine explains that dozens of powerful men were flagged in FBI witness reports that Representative Thomas Massie himself referenced. Hollywood figures, billionaires, politicians, a royal, a rock star, a magician. Let that sink in. But when Americans finally get access to the files, backhand index pointing right entire pages are blacked out. Backhand index pointing right key FBI 302s are unreadable. Backhand index pointing right names are hidden. Ask yourself, if these allegations were totally baseless, why hide them? Transparency doesn't mean protecting reputations. It means letting the truth come out wherever it leads. One of the most shocking revelations is that the DOJ compiled a slide presentation outlining allegations involving some of the most powerful people on earth. Presidents, billionaires, Wall Street titans, royals. Now, let me be very clear, allegations are not convictions. But here's the problem. If regular Americans were named in a federal presentation tied to child sex trafficking, they wouldn't get silence and redactions. They'd get handcuffs and headlines. Two systems of justice. One for us, one for them. Then there's the prosecution memo written after Epstein's death. This document was supposed to analyze who else could be criminally liable. What do we get instead? Heavy redactions, entire sections missing zero explanation of what investigative steps were taken or abandoned. So let me ask the obvious question. Did the DOJ actually investigate these people, or just document their names and move on? Because to patriots who believe in accountability, it looks like the system blinked. The files also confirm something important and horrifying. Epstein wasn't just a criminal. He was a sadistic predator. Psychological abuse, sexual violence, threats, even a firearm present during assaults. And yet, this monster was welcomed into homes of elites, banks, universities, political circles, and social clubs after his conviction. That alone should end careers. This is the part that should outrage every American, regardless of party. Why did so many rich and powerful people continue emailing him, vacationing with him, asking for favors, inviting him places? He was a convicted sex offender. If a normal citizen had that label, they'd be permanently ostracized. But Epstein, he stayed plugged into power. That tells you everything you need to know about how corrupt and morally bankrupt the global elite class has become. Now, the video also covers President Trump, and this is where the truth really matters. Yes, Trump's name appears in the documents because thousands of tips and references were dumped into the FBI system, many of them secondhand, unverified, and politically timed. And what did the DOJ itself say? Backhand index pointing right to claims against Trump were unfounded and uncorroborated. Backhand index pointing right, many arrived right before the 2020 election. Backhand index pointing right, if credible, they would have been weaponized already. That matters. Unlike others, Trump cut ties with Epstein, banned him from Mar-a-Lago, and never flew on his plane. Facts matter, even when the media hates them. At the end of the day, this isn't about politics. It's about justice. The real victims, the survivors, are still waiting. Waiting for names. Waiting for accountability. Waiting for the same system that prosecutes ordinary Americans to finally have the courage to confront the powerful. And as Barry Levine says, unless a future administration releases the remaining documents, this scandal will remain unresolved. This Epstein document dump didn't close the book. It proved something worse. Backhand index pointing right, the system protects itself. Backhand index pointing right, power shields power. Backhand index pointing right, transparency is conditional. And as a right-wing patriot, I'll say this loud and clear. Justice should not depend on wealth, influence, or political connections. If the law doesn't apply equally, then freedom itself is at risk. If you agree, hit that like button, subscribe, and share this video because the truth doesn't stay buried unless we let it.